expectations, but I'm generalising quite a bit. I won't go into too many specifics. Yes, and I am the editor of the Social Research Methods Journal. If you've got any articles that you'd like to propose, please speak to me afterwards. I should emphasise I'm not speaking for the SRA here or its trustees. I'm speaking as an individual. As most of, well, quite a lot of you know, I did work in government for a good many years, and I suppose I was, for a few years, part of Michael Gove's own little bit of the blob, actually, if you think about it, being his chief research officer. I'm also a sociologist, but that's a long time ago. I was a sociologist or a sociologist. I don't quite think I was one in government, I'm not sure. And you can work out from my talk exactly which of those categories, Matthews, I fit into. I think I waver between one and two that he's put up there. So first thing I'm going to ask actually, is it a post-factual world? I think it's worth challenging perhaps the presumptions of the seminar a little bit. Are we actually living in a post-factual world where the views of experts are derided and treated with contempt? Recent events, of course, may strongly encourage that view, and you mentioned philosophers. Bertrand Russell, one of his great quotes, there's going to be quite a few of these: "Our great democracies still tend to think that a stupid man is more likely to be honest than a clever man." Does that ring a bell at all? Anyway, he too is a pessimist, clearly, like all philosophers. But it's worth questioning how far things have really changed as a result of recent events, whether once the furore and emotion over Brexit and the Trump victory have died down a little, whether we really will have really witnessed a long-term change in people's trust in experts and evidence. If we look at Ipsos Mori's survey of public trust, I don't know if Izabella was perhaps going to talk about that, in various types of figures of authority and experts, which has been running more or less since the 1980s, different categories at different times, we see mainly a picture actually since then of stability and consistency rather than a long-run erosion of trust in experts. Of all groups of experts, you might think that pollsters have lost much of their credibility, but the figures up to the end of 2015 don't bear this out. Actually, in fact, just over half the public, maybe you think half's not a lot when it comes to trust, but at the end of last year, 53% said that they trusted pollsters. Is that surprising? To tell the truth, trusting them to tell the truth, and this percentage has actually increased in the last 3 years. Going right back to the early 1990s, the proportion saying they trust pollsters has hovered fairly consistently around the 50% mark. The polling debacle of the May 2015 election actually didn't dent their reputation at all. It went up in the latest survey. Now, it's too soon, obviously, to know whether the EU referendum saga, the failure of the polls there, and more recent events in America has actually had an effect on the perceived trustworthiness of pollsters. You might well think it has, but will that be a lasting effect? Those longer-term figures suggest maybe not, actually. Interestingly, too, trust in civil servants. Many of you are or have been civil servants like myself. That's been fairly steadily increasing since the late 1990s to a peak. It was a peak of 59% at the end of last year. Scientists, too, are now enjoying significantly higher levels of trust than 20 years ago. 79% of people trust them to tell the truth, though I suspect that most people, when they answer that question, see people in white lab coats rather than social scientists, but nonetheless, it doesn't suggest actually there's growing distrust for scientific experts. And interestingly, a poll around the time of the referendum found that academics were, after friends and family, seen as the most trusted source of information on issues relating to the decision on the EU membership. 66% of people trusted them, 73% trusted friends and family. By contrast, no surprises here, government ministers and politicians generally, and journalists, have remained, their trust of them has remained dismally low over the last 30 years. No surprises, as I said, pretty consistently around the 20% mark of trusted ones. They're the least trusted groups of all, along of course with estate agents. And bankers and business leaders are somewhat trusted somewhat more. Again, at the time of the EU referendum, only 12% of people said that they trusted the opinion of politicians, and 16% journalists. Now, although the trouble with those sort of polls is that, of course, there's a social acceptability bias in the answers. You probably don't want to say you get all your ideas from the front page of the Daily Mail. You probably think it sounds better to say, this is what academics have to say, and you may not actually know really what the key influences on your thinking are, but that's what people say. So there isn't much sign there, actually, that people are giving up on experts. The other big thing that you heard, particularly during the referendum campaign, was very frequent pleas for to be told the true facts, the real facts, as if there was a unique set of kind of killer facts that would somehow make the decision for people if I just get hold of those facts. And for those not already firmly committed, clearly found the process of actually being asked to make up their own minds about a complex issue, fairly painful process, and some said it shouldn't be put to a referendum at all. It's very difficult for people to weigh up arguments, economic arguments, alongside quite different kinds of arguments about sovereignty and security. So there's a question about how do we weigh, can you weigh up those very different types of evidence. And in most cases, actually, people were, of course, being asked to judge the plausibility of various different forecasts about what might happen rather than what happened. Now, I think, actually, echoing some of what Matthew said, beliefs are really important. We should never forget that as analysts. Perhaps the key thing I've learned from working for all those years in government was that policy decisions invariably depend on a mixture of evidence and belief, which I think Matthew was also saying, or political instinct as well, of course, as a crude political calculation. You may recognise that one. The exact composition of those different elements in any particular decision varies, but beliefs and instincts are always there somewhere. Analysts, I'm afraid, sometimes have a tendency to try to ignore or look down upon that political process as a somewhat irrational and unhelpful distraction, but it's in the essence of the democratic process, however awkward and sometimes distasteful or seemingly ill-informed it might be. I don't believe that it's possible or even desirable to make major decisions on evidence alone. There's a kind of technocratic vision of how government should work, which can also be undemocratic. Trust us, we are the experts, the hierarchical vision that Matthew referred to. In areas of social and economic policy, that evidence is rarely entirely conclusive or comprehensive enough, or available at the right time. It's often rather better at diagnosing the problem. Again, I think Matthew said this, than identifying the best solution. Sometimes we're rather hesitant to offer those solutions as analysts. If you work in government, it's also, of course, a salutary lesson to learn that effective politics is indeed the art of the possible, that old cliche, but it's true. To be able to do anything at all, in my experience, ministers needed to achieve some degree of consensus. Even if they have a whacking great parliamentary majority, they still have to get consensus across their party, their supporters. That moment of consensus can be very fleeting. It usually involves messy compromises, which may start to undermine the original vision. There's no point in launching an initiative or reform which has little support or enthusiasm from any quarter, which is simply unaffordable in current fiscal circumstances, or where the means of delivery do not exist. And that's a very common, the means of delivery, and the failure to think about those is often a reason why things don't happen or can't happen at the time people try to launch them. Good evidence can and should narrow down the range of policy options, rule out the unlikely, the implausible, or the unachievable. It's a question of decisions informed by evidence, I think, but not only determined by them. We rarely have that degree of decision to actually, that would require, and I think except in one or two specific areas, very narrow areas of policy decision making, I don't think we're ever going to actually achieve that. It remains a case of making better informed choices on the basis of both fundamental beliefs about what is right and evidence which is necessarily includes degrees of uncertainty. Unfortunately, as we all know, honestly expressing that scientific uncertainty is also our Achilles heel. It allows people, and especially the media, to dismiss all the evidence on the ground it's inconclusive. The experts always disagree with each other, and therefore one might as well rely on instinct and so-called common sense. Another Bertrand Russell quote: "The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but wiser people so full of doubts." So the second question I've been asked to address is, what must researchers and analysts do to better connect with their audiences? There's plenty of scope, I think, for improving our act and the way that we connect with people. For example, improving the quality of evidence, especially understanding causality, and I think more experimental trials using random control methods, trial methods, for example, have a key role to play there. Investing in longitudinal studies, things that address the key issue of causality. Another area, reviewing and evaluating what is known and how securely it is known, and I think Jonathan may have something to say about that, conducting more systematic or meta-reviews of existing evidence. I'm sure you'll all be familiar with these kind of approaches. Most of all, I think, communicating better. Communicating what we think evidence what the evidence is in more digestible forms, and I'm not sure that I'm a great fan of infographics. I don't think that's the best answer necessarily there. But finding more ingenious ways of communicating the evidence, providing a more coherent narrative, and analysts are not always so good at that one, of why the evidence matters, what it tells us that we didn't know before, what's new, and not leaving that simply to journalists, though clearly they also have a role. I think more careful explanations for people about how they themselves can evaluate and assess different types of evidence are important. And I think also, in terms of expert commentators and the media, I think they should give more emphasis to the areas of consensus in the evidence than to the areas of disagreement, even if that makes the presentation rather boring. I think the BBC is apparently rethinking some of its previous approach to always having someone who will contest the main evidence and who may be completely maverick, and actually focus a little bit more in terms of their guidelines what the consensus is. I believe they're going to do more on that. These are all necessary steps, the right things to do, but on their own I'm not sure they will suddenly convince people to change their beliefs. Final quote from Bertrand Russell: if a man is offered a fact which goes against his instincts, he will scrutinise it closely, and unless the evidence is overwhelming, he will refuse to believe it. If, on the other hand, he is offered something which affords a reason for acting in accordance to his instincts, he will accept it even on the slightest evidence. The origin of myths is explained in this way. So, as we've been reminded recently, nationalism, xenophobia, combined with feelings of relative deprivation and false nostalgia, makes it for a pretty potent mix. Those core beliefs or instincts are unlikely to be much perturbed by a few inconvenient truths, however well communicated. But I do believe that social scientists do have an important contribution to make in helping policymakers and politicians understand the key drivers of those beliefs, and therefore the kinds of political actions which are likely to steer them in less self-destructive directions.